I like to use a layout pad that's a 16-pound paper. This paper is thick enough to accept all of the medium, the pencils and the markers, and yet you can still see through it and be able to trace things if you need to. The markers I like to use are Prismacolor markers. I like them because they are very good quality, and also Prismacolor markers come double-ended. So you can have a fatter point and a thinner point in the same marker, sort of a dual use out of each color. You may also get these by other name brands, but still try to get a good marker that you're going to use. You also need a see-through 18-inch ruler. This helps you with layout. I also like the Prismacolor pencils because a lot of times I use colored pencils for different fabrics. And also I use colored pencils for their flesh tones sometimes, mixing with the markers. You will also need a good pencil sharpener. It can be an electric one. I like a handheld one better. You don't need electricity. A very good eraser. These are a couple of different erasers. This is a kneaded eraser, which pulls apart, and you can constantly get some new area to use on the eraser. Or this eraser, which is like shaped like a pen, because this way you can get into small areas with this. You also need a set of basic drawing pencils and basic fine line markers. These Micron markers come in a packet, and these are India ink fine points. This is very good for detail work. And for your basic pencil set, you need a few different weights of pencil lead. Like this is a 4H pencil. This is very lightweight. This is very good for my initial gesture drawing because this is easy to erase. Does not smear too much. This is a 6H pencil, which is a little bit darker, but very similar to the 4. This is a 3B pencil. This is much darker. This is for when I go in to do shadowing or when I make bold lines. This is a B pencil. This is also a very good dark lead. So you can see the differences just in these. This is a regular number 2 pencil. A regular number 2 is an HB. So even if you only have access to a number 2 pencil, this will still give you some darkness. It's not as good as the other ones, but it's much darker than the H pencils are. One of the things that you'll need when you're creating a fashion figure is a reference. Having a live model would be your best reference, but if you don't have a live model, you can create a fashion figure from a magazine photo. Swimsuit catalogs are great sources for figures. You can see the entire body, and usually they're in head-to-toe poses. If you don't have a swimsuit catalog, you can use regular magazine photos. These shots are from a red carpet event, and you can see the entire body head to toe here. I also like to use action photos, like these girls walking down the street, because that can show the clothing really well too. So whatever magazines you like, look at the photos, tear out the ones you like, and create your own reference library. When illustrating a fashion figure, we draw in the 10-head proportion. 10-head proportion is a little bit different than how real people look. Real people are in an 8-head proportion. The 10-head proportion elongates the figure from the waist to the floor. This began in the 1920s of streamlining the figure in a long, elegant way and has continued through today. This is the reference that I'm going to be using for my drawing today. And even though she is a fashion model, she is still in regular person proportion. I'm going to elongate her even more. So first I'm going to put the proportion on my page with my see-through ruler. This is going to be our guide. So each head is going to be 1.5 inches tall. So that means I'm going to make marks every 1.5 inches all the way down my page until I have 0 through 10. This is going to give us a total of a 15-inch tall figure. So this 10-head figure, every increment is the same size. From 0 to 1 is her head. At 1.5 is where the shoulders land. 2.5 is the bottom of the bust. This may not apply to every figure, but for most poses where they're standing up straight, all of these will apply. 3.5 is the waist, 4.5 is the crotch, 6 1/4 are where the knees land, and 9 are the ankles. Between 9 and 10 is where the feet are, but depending on whether they're in a high heel or a flat foot will depend on where the foot actually lands. On my reference, I've marked off some of these key places in her proportion. 0 to 1 is her head. Her shoulders are here, not quite at 1.5 because they're at such a sharp angle. Her shoulders are at such a sharp angle because she's got all of her weight on one foot. If you draw a line from the head down to the floor, perpendicular to your grid, this is called the plumb line. This foot is near the plumb line, which means the weight is on this foot. If the feet are separated from the plumb line, or both on the plumb line towards you and away from you, then her weight is balanced that way. So since her weight is all on this leg, this hip is closer to this shoulder, and this hip is farther from this shoulder. You'll see the angle of her hip here versus the angle of her shoulders here. So even though her head is level, all of this is going to be moving. Her front of her body is actually in a curve. So now I'm going to take her and I'm going to apply that in this proportion over here. So I'm going to put lines across at these key points as my guideline, perpendicular to the proportion line I just made. When illustrating a figure, because they're so small, you're actually showing the clothing more than you're showing the body. But if you have a good body shape and good proportion, it's really going to help to accent the clothing. Sometimes, if you know anatomy and musculature really well, you can do much fewer lines on the body to convey the stance that you're trying to convey. Now I'm going to do a gesture drawing of her figure, which is a very light sketch I'm going to do in the light pencil that I'm going to end up building her figure on. I'm looking for the movement, her weight balance, a little bit of where her arms and feet are going, and I'm going to sketch everything in lightly first and then go in with a darker lead and make it look a little more realistic. I begin the fashion figure with a gesture drawing. A gesture drawing is where I'm holding the pencil very lightly and I'm barely touching the paper. What I'm looking for is I'm using the grid here and I'm laying in her body parts like her shoulder, the curve of the front of her body, where her waist is. She's got some curve going on. So I'm looking for the basic shape of a torso. I'm pushing her hip out here for her weight balance. Like I said earlier, her weight is all on this leg because she only has one foot near her plumb line, which is underneath her head. So the weight always ends up being underneath the head. So when I curve this out, I know I'm going to drop her foot right in this area. I like to keep my hand moving so that the quality of the line is very simplified. I'm looking for action here more than accuracy to get some movement into this figure. This girl is here as my little salesperson. She's going to be selling my outfit. So she better have some good style. And that'll do that for her arm. Here on her head, I can lightly put in where her eyes will be. Her eyes are half of the head. So halfway down my first oval here, this is the eye level. Half of what's left is the bottom of her nose, and half of what's left is the center of her mouth. So I can lightly put in where I'm going to be putting her features in now during the gesture. And that will be good enough. From here, I'm going to turn this into the muscular drawing. So I'm going to try to flesh her body out without any clothes on it and put in the details of her hands, her fingers, and her body parts. This elbow is going to end up right near her waist because when your arms are down, your elbows hit your waist. But here, where this is foreshortened, I'm going to have to roll her forearm over her bicep and roll her hand over her forearm to foreshorten this area. Foreshortening because the arm is coming at me. Here, I'm going to be putting in her thigh. Her foot is actually facing this direction. So at her knee, I'm going to change direction so that her toe will end up pointing in that direction. Here will be her heels and ankles at 9. This will go up to her knee level. This foot on the other side can go anywhere at this point because all of the weight is on this shoe. Then this shoe can end up anywhere. I'm just going to put this off to the side and thin out her limbs a little bit. Here, this is the center front of her body, and her pelvis is tilted a little bit. So here at the crotch, this is where her center is going to come right up between her chest. This will give me where to lay in her chest, the bottom of the bust at 2.5, the shoulders at 1.5. As you can see, she's starting to take shape. I'm going to get my eraser and take off some of the more scribbly lines so that I can actually start to flesh her out. I'm going to be drawing her with almost no clothing on so that I can use this figure again and again. Every time I want to put on an outfit, I will not have to start from scratch because I can use this figure again and again by leaving her with minimal clothing. Here, I start with her eyes. Make sure that there is space between the eyes and between the eyes and the side of the head. At the eye line is also the top of the ear. So I can see her ears. I'm going to lay them in now. And at the top of the ear, I'm going to start to draw in her cheekbone, which is aimed at her mouth. It's not going to connect to her mouth, but I'm going to aim it in that direction. When I'm drawing in her lip, I use that center line to draw a top lip first and bottom lip second. The center line always remains the darkest. Here her chin is a little bit down, so we don't quite see in her nostril, but I can draw the bottom of her nose and the nostril flare. Then right above her eyes, I will draw in her eyelids, and from the inner eye will begin her eyebrow, which I will arch up over her eyes. Then here on this side, on a woman's neck, we do a pedestal neck, so it's going to be slightly inside the edge of her jaw, and this line is going to curve down into her shoulder blade. These are her shoulders right here. And for my total width, I want about 3 heads width for her shoulders. I don't want her shoulders to be right under her ears, and I don't want them to be too far out either. So if you're estimating the width, you can estimate that 3 heads wide is about how wide you want somebody on a flat front view.